and Rex Biberston. So Rex is somebody that I know a little bit because we actually did a podcast together recently. Rex is the co-author of the book Outbound Sales No Fluff. He's a longtime top of funnel sales consultant and a head of sales and marketing for OpenSense. He's worked with over 100 early stage companies to take products to market, and he builds processes that help sales professionals have winning conversations with their ideal buyers. So that's why we've brought him on. He's a wonderful resource. And then Tyler Krenbrink is one of my wonderful colleagues at Predictable Revenue. So he is an account strategist. That means that he's prospecting on behalf of a variety of different clients in different industries. So he's got a wealth of kind of varied knowledge in prospecting. He specializes in synthesizing complex solutions into relevant, concise messaging, which is something that's so important with outbound. His sales background has given him ground level insight into the persona psychology, which informs tone, copy, and how to effectively position value in a sea of pitches. So that's something we even touched on at the end of the last session. So those of you that are still here, we're just going to give you some more context on how to solve those problems. So yeah, welcome you two. I'll let you say hi here for a sec.
Yeah, thanks. Excited to be here. Always enjoy a good session with the Predictable Revenue team. I know, Sarah, we had a fun time last time talking about sequences and some of the things that Tyler and I will probably dig into today, maybe a little more in depth with some great examples that people have shared.
Perfect. Rex, I wanted to say hello before I jumped off, but I'm gonna kill my video for a bit, go grab a cup of coffee. I might come back and join you guys because anytime Rex has something to say, I definitely want to be listening. Same goes for Tyler. So it's good to see you both. I'm gonna kill my video for a bit, but I'll be around. And chat, I'll still be shouting out to these people. And Ben is still keeping an eye on chat, so feel free, just throw stuff in chat. Ben will make sure it gets to the speakers, even if you can't see my face.
Cool. And yeah, hello, Tyler.
And thank you for the generous introduction. It felt now like I got a lot of confidence. I got a lot to live up to right now. I'm excited to dig into it. It's kind of an ethereal topic that we're about to get into.
Yeah, totally. Just want to reiterate what Colin said about tossing questions in the chat. So Ben is going to be there to copy and paste them over to me. I'm going to pose them to these guys kind of, I think, when it's most relevant. So if some of your questions get kind of left to the end, that's on purpose. If they don't get answered, these two will be active in that Slack community to answer any of those unanswered questions. So now's a really good time to join that Slack community if you haven't already. That link is there in the YouTube chat. Just a kind of a brief overview of what we'll be talking about before we dive into the details here. We're going to be talking about the secret formula framework and the four things that are within that secret formula framework. Wow, framework. Secret formula framework. We'll actually leave that to the imagination. We'll let these guys touch on that in a sec. We'll talk about optimizing messaging and value props post-COVID market, being more human and connecting at a personal level, how outreach evolves throughout sequences and how to adapt to changes. And finally, building sequences with relevant messaging that cuts through the noise. So one last thing I want to say before I leave it to these two is if you guys have any sequences, I know that we asked for some of them in the last talk. So if you have any sequences that you want us to have a look at, we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for Rex and Tyler to do a bit of a live audit and give some of their input on some sequences. So if you guys want to send those over to Veronica at predictablerevenue.com, we'll make sure to screen share them, get them in front of these two experts, and they can dig into them at the end. But without further ado, I will leave it to Rex and Tyler.
Cool. Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned at the very beginning, kind of the topic for the session is the formula, right? There's a secret formula that's not so stinking secret if you think about it. When we share it with you, you'll recognize all the components of it. I think the most important thing is the order in which we place those components, because if you put the wrong thing first, then you're going to spend a lot of time doing the wrong activities, focus on the wrong areas of effort. So I'll break it down, and Tyler, I'll have you add to it if that's okay. So the core of this thing that I've been talking about for years and wrote about in the book with my friend Ryan is it's figuring out your right target. So are you talking to the right people, the right message? So that's the second component. So are you saying something relevant? Are you offering something of value? Right? And then channel, are you talking in the right channel? You're trying to reach them somewhere that they expect to be reached, that they're okay being reached, that they're spending their time. And then ultimately is timing. Is this the right time to reach out to them? Is there some signal that you can leverage to know hey, this person now should be most likely to take a conversation around this a little bit further. Those are the 4 key components. So target, message, channel, timing, taken in that order. Tyler, I know you and I chatted about this ahead of this event, and I would love to hear, obviously share some thoughts on this, and we can keep going deeper on it.
Yeah, so when I bring on a new client, this is definitely the framework that I use. It's really important to get at the top of that list and understand who you're reaching out to before you design anything. Because if you design your messaging and it's irrelevant to your persona, you're building out your sequence and it's not necessarily going to be optimized for the people that you're reaching out to. It just sort of like all falls apart. So you really need the context of the first thing to be able to move on to the next.
Yeah. Yeah, and when it comes to the target, I think we'll do probably some breakdowns of some sequences that have been shared. But when I think about targeting, we're thinking at first the company level. So what types of companies have we helped in the past? Are we looking to help? And then we break it down by persona. There doesn't always have to be a theme by something like industry. Company size is generally going to be something that's thematically consistent across a segment. Like when we build out a campaign for OpenSense or from some of my past clients, it definitely comes out like size is relevant because companies with 100 employees are very different than companies with 10,000 or more employees. I mean, vastly different, even with the same title. So you can't just go by persona. You can't say all CMOs have the same problems. I mean, not even close. Yeah. Not even close. So we think about it in terms of company, and then we think about it in terms of the individual contact that you're going to be reaching out to. And we group those in personas so that we know, hey, generally speaking, in this segment, people with this title or type of responsibility are going to have these same types of problems. So that then we know we can master the message. We can make that relevant to this individual at this company at this time. So Tyler, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and another thing that I like to look at, at the company level here is if our value prop is going to be, sort of consistent across different types of industries. So, we may have like very granular, positions here that we could offer to something within this industry. But, if that is replicatable across like maybe some tertiary or similar companies here, and we can scale that, and scalability is really what I look for when I'm designing sequences and outreach because time is really limited. That's sort of like the next stage that I'm looking to get into.
Sure. Sarah, I don't know if you had anything to throw in there from your experience or if you have any questions you want to bring up when we talk about kind of the targeting component of the formula there.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is kind of similar to Tyler's in that I'm looking for scalability. For a lot of my career here at Predictable Revenue, I've been the sole outbound SDR. So I'm really looking for volume, but of course, volume is not more important than quality. So something like Tyler's saying there, if I can find a value prop and narrow it down in the list building so that I can be as relevant as possible and as personalized as possible with the smallest amount of work in each message that I'm sending out, that's ideal for me.
Well, I think something that we haven't hit on that is a very common issue for people building out sequences and campaigns and thinking along these lines. They're thinking too broadly. Like the answer to your targeting is probably you're too broad. If it's not, I can't give you a secret number. There's a secret formula. There's no secret number for how many prospects you want in a given campaign. I look for at least 100, right? I need to have enough conversations that it's, worth my time to customize and tailor. Like, that your conversion rates aren't going to be 100%. So you've got to have enough conversations first, from those conversations converting to ideally meetings or next conversations. But what I look for, so if you're talking about segmenting, I have a lot of customers I've worked with in the past who said, oh, we can sell to anyone. Great. Don't start with that. That's terrible. While that might be true, and in fact, we heard on the previous session, a client of Predictable Revenues who could sell custom software development to, nearly anyone for, nearly any problem and create a solution for them. That's way too incredibly broad. So what you're looking for is reference or anchor customers, customer stories, case studies that you can leverage. So even if, at OpenSense, we work with a ton of banks. Banks freaking love us. Like that's just one of the segments that have happened to come up through our inbound marketing primarily. And we've noticed a lot of banks. That doesn't mean that we only sell to banks. It doesn't mean I change my website just for banks. But it sounds like it's probably worth my time to build out a campaign for banking and finance. Like this is probably well worth it because now I can reference customers by name. I don't have to just say we work with companies like you. I can say we work with this company and that company, or banks of a certain size in a certain region similar to you. So like there's more personalization, but there's still some scalability there because there's a lot of banks out there. So, you don't want to go too broad. You don't want to go too narrow, but I would say err on the side of caution for narrow. Like shoot for that smaller audience rather than the larger one, because you're competing with everybody else trying to get these people's time. So when we're talking about targeting, that's what leads to messaging. It's all about that critical component of targeting first. That's why we do it before messaging, before channel, before timing, because none of that matters until you know the person at the type of company you're trying to sell to.
I'd love to jump in here just to ask those people in the YouTube chat. Can you give us your targeting criteria for a number of campaigns or one campaign that you're doing right now? And we'll get these guys to take a look at it and let you know whether they think that's narrow enough. Take the time, toss that in, think about whatever your current campaign is, maybe your best performing, your worst performing, toss in. So like title, geography, company size, revenue, anything that you use for targeting, toss that in and we'll take a look at it. But back to you guys.
Awesome. Yeah. Tyler, any other thoughts on targeting before we start chatting about messaging?
I got a couple thoughts. I also just want to sort of address that this is just working with sales teams about generating new cold leads is that, and having worked in the past as a salesperson myself, like I understand that confidence that gets when they say like, I can sell this to anybody. And what we really want to do with this kind of cold outreach is that like, once you get in front of somebody, absolutely, you know what, you do your thing. And what we really need to do is kind of build out like this messaging that has and targeting that really has that like relevant messaging, relevant, pain points, relevant targeting. Otherwise, we're never going to have these conversations.
Yeah. One of the things that I tell all my sales reps and anybody I've coached in the past is like, it's our job to sell to them, not their job to buy from us. So it's your job to figure out why is this relevant to them, to do the heavy lifting, to make it obvious. I mean, you've got to make it stupid obvious that this is valuable to them. Because the thing you're fighting against is not only the inundation of all the channels out there, especially post-COVID, where everybody's back on the phones, everybody's back on email, everybody's on social because we're not going to events, we're changing the channels that we're using. But like you're competing with the status quo, which is so much more powerful than doing anything at all. When we talk about the personas in targeting, like what is it that is going to cost them their job? Like what puts their head on the chopping block and what's going to get them a raise? Like those are the ways that we need to be thinking about targeting. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Tyler.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree that getting onto that sort of like risk aversion, I think is sort of like the way that a lot of people should be looking to go these days. We're kind of getting out of a really rough spot here, and what companies are really looking to do is get things to be more stable, add more value, be more efficient. But it's not necessarily something that like after having been in the status quo for so long, you're going to be aware of. So what our responsibility is here is to really figure out how we're going to position ourselves and like get into their inbox and be like, oh shit, that actually makes so much sense for me. Yeah, let's actually like talk, where I'm going to read this message, and when you get back to me, I'll have had an impression already.
Yeah. Sarah, did we get anybody through the chat there?
Doesn't look like we have anybody yet. So let's just move ahead and we can always come back to those. Oh, actually, here, one just popped in as I'm speaking. They're all coming in. Cool. Great timing, guys. Okay, so here's one. Funding stage, technologies they're currently using. Just those two.
Yeah, so those are terrific components if they're relevant to the product you're offering, or if you have a company of a similar funding stage with similar technologies currently leveraged. I mean, it's only useful if it's relevant, if it makes your case more obvious for them. But two great criteria. There's tons of other criteria we didn't mention. Tyler, maybe we should break these down a little bit further from what you've seen. But funding stage could be it. Even I'd say like when we're looking at targeting an individual. So let's say our market's really, really broad. One of the things you can do is like in LinkedIn Sales Navigator, go look for people who were previously at a current customer of yours. If you have big national customers and people move on all the time, hey, previously at my current customer or a past customer of ours, there's like a natural introduction. Hey, we used to manage the email signatures over at Salesforce and you used to be there last year. We should talk. It's crazy. Like what a small world. Like a lot easier, more natural there. So you go down the persona route and look for those individual contacts who fit those certain criteria. But funding stage, technologies they're currently using, the recency of their hire, So if they just got brought on, this is typically a trigger for people to reach out and say, hey, you're probably looking for, kind of shake things up and make an impact right out of the gates as a new executive, for example. That's kind of a common trigger. I don't know, Tyler, if you have any others you want to throw out there.
Yeah, honestly, my hire date, I feel, is probably one of the biggest ones that you just touched on there. That's when people really want to make a change.
And I would be conscious of, when we get into messaging here, I would be very, very conscious of the fact that those are triggers for everyone, right? That this is not unique to your company. And now you're the only genius sales rep who ever thought of, or marketer who ever thought of crafting a message to someone who just got hired. Be aware how inundated they're going to be. So it's almost, if there's a trigger, there's even more need for you to stand out. But even though the value proposition might be more obvious, you're also competing with more value propositions simultaneously in those same channels.
And there's definitely a component of timing in it. Like, the better you understand the industry that you're reaching out to, some of them have better times that you want to reach out to. Obviously, some of them are just not going to reply to you. And really knowing when it is time to get in that kind of like warm spot where like either they're going to be feeling crunch soon and they know that, or they've just gotten past it, and kind of crafting your messaging around that, kind of like, again, within context of like your product or your outreach.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So that was from Rahul. So funding stage and technologies is what you're currently looking for. And some additions that these guys thought you could include would be recent hires, or when somebody was hired, and then just timing for that market. Is there any kind of key time that you should or shouldn't reach out? We've got another one coming in here. So they're segmenting by location, UK, industry, management consulting, size, 50 to 200 employees. Function for titles is sales and business development. Seniority is excluding entry, training, and unpaid. So I guess everyone from manager and up, or even kind of SDR, or I guess that might be entry level. But it seems like pretty much every title, every seniority level, except for unpaid training or entry. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, location, I'm not from the UK, obviously, so I don't have as much to say about UK-based segmenting, but I think that there are going to be some significant differences in how you might message something to different parts of the UK. So just terminology that they use for business might be slightly different in different parts of the kingdom there. So I would say be a little bit cautious around that. It's kind of like Canada versus the US in terms of messaging, predictable revenue being largely based in Canada. You guys know that we just use different terminology sometimes. So it's important to be intelligent about that, be cautious about that. So that's first blush, I'm thinking UK, sure, but could you segment a little bit smaller and be like Ireland specific, for example, or something along those lines? But in general, I also see the difference between like entry being a question mark for me. If I were building a list for this company, I'd say, what do you mean by entry level? Training and unpaid seems like interns and things like that. But is a director of sales or a VP of sales, or do they have the same worldview? Do they have the same challenges? It's not necessarily true. So I would be a little cautious. If it's true that there's generally one sales leader at a company of 50 employees who are in management consulting in the UK, great. Then you'd go after whatever title is relevant there, because there'd be the one person. But if you're finding there's multiple levels to that leadership, I would probably want to segment a little bit further, or at least start with, hey, if I can't get a VP, I'm going to get a director. I wouldn't try the VP and the director with the same messaging. I'd consider splitting those up. Tyler, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I haven't had any experience doing outreach to individual contributors. I think that maybe there is a possibility when you get to smaller companies like this that individuals, have more say. But I just don't know if I would, have that in my initial outreach. Maybe like put that off to the side, see if that makes sense to reach out. But in terms of targeting by region here, if you're able to bring that up, it definitely, I find that at least in the US, where we're able to kind of get a bit more granular with how we're segmenting out like states or counties or whatever, it becomes really relevant. People like feeling like they're getting something that's local or something that's like very like relevant to their world. It just sort of creates that instant familiarity. It's almost like a cheat code to, get like +1 to your familiarity. And not only that, if you have like regional based customers that you're reaching out to with this segment, you can bring that up in your messaging. That's like actual like competition. That's going to be huge. It's going to have a big impact on your positive rate. So I think that if you're able to go, the UK is like pretty densely populated. And I'm not familiar with how to segment out like list building there, but if you're able to do that like really regionally, and my basic understanding around the different regions in the UK are soccer teams, so use that as a little like cheat code to figure out where you're relevant.
Yeah, an example of that in the US, just to double down on this idea before we move on, is that like if you are, so I'm in Sacramento, California, which is on the West Coast for those who don't know. And San Francisco is about 2 hours from here, and they call that the Bay Area. If you're a Bay Area company, you want to hear someone reference a Bay Area company. Like the Bay Area is this world in and of itself. So if you say, hey, we have customers like someone in the southeastern US, even if they're in my segment, I may not have heard of them, and I certainly wouldn't care as much as if they were in my segment and in my region. The region matters a lot there. It has a lot of impact. So I'd say for certain regions, depending on the business type, I mean, if you're a technology company or if you're selling to technology companies in San Francisco proper or the area around it, you've got to reference a company in San Francisco proper or the area around it to really have the same impact. So totally agree.
Nice. Interesting addition there. Yeah, I haven't thought about that. Okay, one last one here before we move on is from Paul Morgan. He says his targets are very niche. Hirers of non-destructive testing personnel. He says niche, but they're used in many industrial sectors. There are more than 80,000 in the US alone. So a super niche title, but one that exists in a lot of different companies in a lot of different industrial sectors. Do you think it's enough to go by just that title, since they are in these varied industries and varied companies?
It doesn't even sound like it's a title. So that, I mean, my thought is when you say hirers, there is a hiring manager and there's an HR executive responsible for hiring. So the question, are you selling to HR at companies that have non-destructive testing personnel, or are you selling to the supervisor for the non-destructive testing department, wing, team? So there's kind of the question of who is that person that you want to sell to. Anytime you can get a very niche, I mean, and I imagine because of the nature of the description here, non-destructive testing personnel is a pretty darn specific phrase. I'd imagine the companies where that's recognized, you're going to do pretty well with just leveraging that. I don't know the market well enough to say, but if there's not a ton of competition out there, just knowing how to phrase it, just knowing that that's the term you need to use is already going to give you a leg up. So I don't know if there's more segmentation required there. I would say, again, if there's 80,000 in the US, yes, segment further and say like all companies that meet those criteria, and then split them into the industries or regions and say, hey, we know somebody near you, or we specifically know a company in your industry that meets these criteria as well, and reference those because those are going to take you a lot further. But yeah, like NDT, the fact that you know that that's an acronym you could use probably means you've got a niche industry enough that you're going to win by just referencing that. Tyler, yeah.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there about the persona. Like if you can get that deep into your niche, then that's going to do wonders for you. But if you had 80,000 contacts, then you have enough data to be able to, break that off and run some tests and get like the lowest hanging fruit rolling out.
And I would be cautious of being a little overassumptive here. Like I'm excited when I see something like NDT because I think, oh, that's got to be industry, jargon. But it might be company jargon. So I'd just be a little careful of this. Like if you have non-destructive testing at a hospital versus at a construction site, again, not familiar with the actual service, but my sister works at a hospital. The language there is an entire language. Like everything is in hospital speak. If you work in, the corporate environment, it's totally different. So just to be very careful that you're not using an assumption or you're not leveraging an assumption that the term your company uses as globally applicable is actually globally applicable, where it might be industry specific.
Nice. So we just got a little clarification there from Paul that it is indeed the HR, CEO, NDT manager, HR, depending on company size. So you were right, Rex, in kind of who those titles are.
Yeah, I imagine HR is a totally different argument than CEO. Like if you're trying to sell anything to HR, they just have totally different motivations and concerns, and like their head is on the chopping block in a totally different way. Somebody in HR reporting even up to the CEO versus the CEO reporting to the board, I mean, vastly different concerns. As well as like an NDT manager, I imagine there's all kinds of concerns that have nothing to do with what HR cares about. So those are totally separate campaigns. I wouldn't even try and lump those together. It sounds like there's a big enough market to very much separate those out.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for including those in the chat, adding them in to the conversation. And yeah, we'll let these guys continue on to the next topic.
Cool. I think we've been hinting at it quite a bit, or like referencing it in passing here, like that messaging relies entirely on targeting. So if you get the right target, then you know that you can craft a message that's relevant to them. And in general, I mean, a principle we talked about in our book is that, like, nobody cares about your product. Literally no one. They care if you can solve a problem for them. And it's tough. So representing, a lot of companies in the past where they were very certain it was a very big problem, but it's because they developed the solution for it. Like they think that that's the world's biggest problem to this persona. In reality, it very much might not be. So being very cautious about your assumptions there, but your message relates to the problem you can solve for the person at the company that you're targeting. So target comes first and then this message. And I think we should talk about messaging generally, and then maybe Tyler and I can break down how much messaging has had to adapt because of COVID and like current circumstances. And especially with the rise of automation, there's a ton of things that have had to change. But Tyler, your thoughts on kind of the general messaging principles at stake here based on what we've been talking about?
Yeah, so there's definitely like a need for the persona to come first and to build your outreach around that. And that's also going to inform, how your cadence works, which is to say, like, which steps come at what point, and we'll get into that a little bit as we get deeper into engagement. But I think you got onto the right point there, Grex.
Yeah, and messaging kind of encompasses two things, right? So it's your offer and it's how you phrase it. I would say remembering that your offer is competing with literally doing nothing except hitting delete or ignoring you. So it's very, very difficult to present an offer that is more compelling than doing nothing at all. Because they likely didn't get their job because they're stupid or don't know what they're doing. They likely got their job because they were expected to be able to perform and they weren't looking for you to interrupt their day and offer them something. But if you can provide a compelling offer, fantastic. I'll give you an example of a compelling offer I saw just the other day. I was working with a company that was trying to improve their messaging. And they help retailers work with brands that are more artisanal, and so they can get those brands into the retailers. And they were offering in a cold email to retailers, hey, would you mind if I shared with you, or would you be interested in me sharing with you 3 brands we think would be a hot selling item at your retail establishment? That is a lot of value right up front. And it doesn't require a lot of work, but it clearly presents value. So like the offer in the message there is, I'm going to tell you some brands that you could totally go around me on and reach out to them, but it just proves the point that I know what I'm doing. So it's very relevant, very focused, but it didn't actually require them to do it up front, which was awesome because it saved them the time of all the incredible painstaking research, but really was used as a signal. Hey, these brands or these retailers are considering new brands. I should spend the extra time to go and talk to them. So where I think about the offer is being as clearly valuable as possible. So it's better than doing nothing. And then when you're competing with others in your space, how do you make it different? Because like a custom software development shop, you're competing with literally 1,000 other custom software development shops. How do you not just offer conversation, right? How do you do something more? So Tyler, what maybe you can share some of the offers you guys have leveraged or some that you've seen that are successful.
What we find most success in, or what I've been personally finding most success in, is when we're really able to not even really talk about the solution at all. We really just talk about like what it is that we're solving with it and doing it as concisely and as plainly as possible, so that we put it on the table, we introduce ourselves and we say, or we introduce ourselves and we follow up with like, hey, you know what, this is what you're going to achieve with this, a little bit about it, but does it sound like worth your time? Which is a very kind of like traditional like outreach. This is very much working in the industrial space where we're just showing very plainly, like, this is something that you need to get done. And it's resonated really well because I think that it addresses very clearly what our persona's needs are at the time.
Yeah, and there are industries where just offering a conversation, and depending on the problem that you solve, offering a conversation is enough. Like, frankly, it's totally sufficient. Like you mentioned, industrial sector, maybe they haven't been as inundated with the offer of a 30 or 15-minute meeting as everybody else. But just being cognizant of like what you sell as well, how much competition is out there, that's the barrier to entry to getting somebody to move. So I like, maybe they're not competing with a ton of people in that industrial segment and they're worth a conversation because they don't know how to solve that problem or achieve that outcome. I think what you mentioned was outcomes focused, right? And not like, here's the solution in great painstaking detail, which as we get into some of the examples, I'm sure we'll see people explain way too much what their product is and way too much in depth about how they solve a problem. But it's simply, hey, here's the problem we address. Here's outcomes we're seeing. I'm sure you want to look at those outcomes. Like, we can talk through how we solve that. And I think there's also like the hidden information, or the secret behind all of this is that if it's compelling enough, if the problem is real enough for them, they're going to go to your website. I can pretty much guarantee we drive a lot of traffic from outbound prospecting to websites because people think, hey, this is a big enough problem, but could they really solve it? And they go see those brands, those logos you're working with on your website, and they're like, okay, yeah, I'll take a meeting with this person. They don't do that in a silo or in a vacuum. Like, they're also looking at you from these different angles. So yeah, I think you're right on there, Tyler, with how you're messaging that in a real brief way and not focusing so much on the solution as you are on the outcomes of the solution.
Let's get another little bit of chat participation here. How about you guys in the chat throw us your value prop? If your value prop is not we do XYZ, but a rather we help so-and-sos do XYZ. Let's hear those kind of solution-based value props from you guys. Or even if you have a product-based one, throw it in there and we'll see if we can help you maybe switch it over to a more solution-based value prop. And it sounds like these guys have some more examples too. So take a couple minutes to get those in there. And when they go over their examples, we'll look at yours as well.
And this can be one of the hardest things for people to do. So while everybody's thinking about how to chat this in, don't be afraid. I always recommend that people write a 10-word and a 30-word. This is just an approximation. It doesn't need to be exactly that many words. But, we help X do Y by Z. So Z is the process or the methodology or the solution. But you're talking about we help X, who's the target, to accomplish Y, which is the outcome, through Z. And you might include a bit of the problem in the explanation of what the outcome is, right? Like, we help them to eliminate this problem, or we help them to increase this stat, whatever it is. But the short version is, how do you pitch that when you have like 5 seconds? And then the long version that I always prefer hearing about as well is like, what if they say, okay, tell me more, right? Or like, what do you mean by that? And then you break down a little bit more of the solution. But again, 30 words is not very much language. Like, that is not a lot to communicate. So it's not you getting super verbose about your solution. So it still keeps it pretty tight. And if you have both of those, you can craft a lot of great emails. You can prep a lot of great cold call scripts. You can do a lot of great LinkedIn work. But the 10 and 30 word form are usually pretty helpful.
And ironically enough, like, while that's not a lot of words or language to use from like a sales perspective, from your prospect perspective, that's a time sink. And honestly, like, even 30 words, if I'm really busy and I'm slammed and I get an email and it's like indented twice, if I don't know about you, I'm probably not going to read it.
Yeah. It's definitely the 30 word is the follow-up, right? Is the, I don't know if I'm ready to take a meeting. Tell me more about this. Great. Like, now I have a shot. Now I have something that needs to be super impactful and clear, but still pretty darn short. I mean, 30 words, just not a lot.
Yeah. And a lot of the, theory and, direction that I go with my messaging is to make sure that I'm not even really like trying to get too deep into like a value prop or anything like that. Is I want to introduce like a cold prospect into, like what it is we're doing, what we're looking to have a conversation about, but even just to go to like a discovery call, because I think that like if somebody's never heard of you, then you really can't expect anything better than to get them to a position where they're willing to give you time of day. And that's, at very early stages of an engagement, that's a huge success. And that's what we really need to focus in on achieving.
Awesome. We have a couple of value props coming in here. So let's fire those ones off. I'm going to go with Rena first because I know that we missed you on the last question. So this is the value prop. We help optometrists get more patients by building a powerful online presence for your practice.
I love it. I love that it's specific to optometrists, right? There's a difference between ophthalmologists and optometrists. So I feel like it resonates with me if I'm an optometrist. Getting more patients, common problem, right? Common challenge. You're competing in a crowded market in a region. You definitely want to get more patients. Building a powerful online presence for your practice. A little vague, and my only concern as an optometrist is, oh my gosh, are they going to pitch me another website rebuild? I like the presence. I think the presence is probably key there. And I would assume, and maybe Rena, you can give us some information on this, but I would assume that you're doing something with social media, advertising, or some other way of distributing information about the company, or rather that optometry location online. So I'm assuming it's more than a website rebuild, because the risk you run here is that you've made a very cool value proposition, and the solution that you create for them is just redoing their website, which frankly would be kind of a bit of a letdown from this very promising value proposition.
Awesome. Yeah. So Rena, give us a little more context. And while you're doing that, we've got one from Katie Lawrence. We help HR create brand ambassadors. Sorry, I'll start that again. We help HR create brand ambassadors of exiting employees by putting a better outplacement program in place, preserving Glassdoor scores during layoffs.
Interesting. Tyler, you want to take this one? I've got some thoughts.
I think this is something that I would have to actually read and take a look at. I feel like you've got a very thick statement here, but there's a bit of a challenge with readability. I think that maybe we could even just choose maybe one specific, value proper, how we're achieving our goals here. It sounds like we got a couple of different things here. I'd even just really focus on reducing it to creating brand ambassadors through optimizing Glassdoor reviews, and then kind of get into more details in a bit.
It sounds like the help HR create brand ambassadors, but also help HR preserve Glassdoor scores. Those are like the same piece. Those are the we help X do Y. Those are both Y. So maybe that's a case where you segment and you figure out what one of those things is more important to the person that you reach out to. And then you do or even you A/B test these two, because it seems like, I think that part of how it's such a dense statement is because we've got two Ys.
Yeah. And there's something in the middle there that I think actually might be the service. So by putting a better outplacement program in place, one is outplacement, the term that they use. I'm unfamiliar with it, not having been in HR. I'm assuming it's an industry term, or rather it's a role specific term. So outplacement. It does sound a little odd. So outplacement, I would just double check on that. I would consider even restructuring this to, we put in place impactful, empowering, exciting outplacement programs that turn exiting employees into brand ambassadors. I don't think you have to say HR. I don't think HR cares about creating brand ambassadors. I think they care about the program you can put in place that has a positive outcome. So flipping that on its head, even though I said, we help X do Y by Z, I think, you should reconsider HR as the thing that you need to reference here and say, we put in place, exciting outplacement programs that turn exiting employees into brand ambassadors. The Glassdoor thing is another pain point that I would definitely hit on. I would say, we help HR maintain incredible Glassdoor reviews by making their exiting employees enthusiastic about their next steps, or something like you can do something different there. This was probably 2 or 3 value propositions kind of crammed into one.
Awesome. And we've got another one here from Rahul. So we help B2B. Oh, hold on. It scrolled up. Okay. We help B2B find the winning behavior of their top sales rep and distribute it as suggestions to the team by adding a layer of intelligence on top of sales engagement.
I heard a lot of terms I'm familiar with. And I'll tell you, I've been in sales and sales tech my entire career. I don't know what you do, Rahul. I couldn't tell you from that what that means. So I would say it's a little bit vague in terms of, first of all, the problem you're solving. If it's finding winning behavior, if it's distributing, best practices, and you don't say best practices here, and then intelligence on top of sales engagement, it becomes difficult for me to decipher what it is you're proposing to do. And because whether you're a data provider or a piece of software in sales, you kind of propose to do this with a million different solutions. I want to know a little bit more about how you're positioning yourself so that I can compare you to things I know. Especially in sales technology, sales services, it's very inundated with options. And everybody promises bigger deals, faster deals, more deals, whatever it is, the winning formula here. You could be literally anything here. So I would say, help us focus this down into what it is that you're actually providing. I would actually be a little more solution oriented than outcomes oriented in this particular case. Tyler, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and again, I'm rereading this here, and I'm trying to figure out how maybe like we would change it a bit. I think that like we could definitely condense a lot of like B2B to find the winning behavior of the top sales reps, and I think that like we just winning behavior or winning sales behaviors, and distributed suggestions to the team by adding a layer of get more into like more specific to your solution here, so we kind of understand a little bit better what it is that we're looking to do here.
My guess, and Tyler, correct me if you think it's different here, and well, maybe you can add some, but it sounds like what you're going to do is assess my top players, right? My best sales reps, take what makes them great and apply it to our sales engagement platform to make it easier for my other reps to replicate. So I would say, like, we replicate your top performing sales reps right where your other sales reps live, or like being a little more focused on how you accomplish it, but still very brief. If it's literally a layer of intelligence on top of sales engagement, that could be data, that could be a whole bunch of things. But I would focus on like, hey, we turn your B players into A players, or like just a little bit more specific about performance enhancement through your sales engagement technology. I don't know. I think that's where I'd go with that one.
Okay, we'll just talk about one more here so that we can get on to the next topic you guys have. So from Joe McGee, FreightPay helps finance managers and logistics operations digitize payments to reconcile disputes faster and provide better cash flow insights.
Logistics operation. Yeah, I think that when we say we help X do Y by Z, the X is too detailed here. So when you talk about finance managers in logistics operations, I would consider saying logistics operations, or like we help. I'm trying to think if these are logistics companies or the finance manager over logistics operations at large enterprise companies, manufacturers, for example. So like, is it the people who are managing the finance around the shipment of goods being produced, or are you talking to logistics companies? And like, it's a little unclear who the target is here. So it's a little hard to provide advice on that. And then two outcomes are a little confusing. I would maybe go for a broader outcome in the short version and consider making a long version that breaks down the outcomes. So like, digitize payments to reconcile disputes faster and provide better cash flow insights. I would cut out half of that and just, either digitize payments or I'd probably not emphasize digitize payments, but probably emphasize the reconcile disputes faster, providing better cash flow insights, or just provide better cash flow insights. Like, focus on one outcome of those two things. I don't know, Tyler.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on, just choosing one of those outcomes here. And it even looked like, because it looks like we've got a good idea about who we want to target, and that's great to like kind of like reference. But if you're able to get the insight to figure out internally how to like refer to them, like, by their job, but not by their title, and it's kind of hard, and you can't always really do it. But if you can synthesize that into something that's like a little bit tighter, a little bit more relevant there, I think that you've got a really like strong proposition for them. But if I'm looking at that and be like, well, I know that I'm a finance manager in logistics operations. Yeah. So it's why am I be referring to as such?
Yeah.
Nice. So you guys, I know a couple of you, Paul Morgan, Rena, you had some more context. Rahul, you had some more, and Paul Roberts. Hang on to those ideas. Put them in the Slack chat so that we can have Rex and Tyler get to them. But I want to make sure that they get through the rest of their presentation. So back to you guys.
Yeah, so we've talked about target, we've talked about message. I think we ought to talk about channel, because a lot of what we have referenced is optimizing for email, but that is definitely not the only channel. I don't want anybody to think that's the only channel. There's also a channel we can piggyback on top of email. So I'll say, like, look, I'm a huge cold calling fan. The very first time I interacted with the Predictable Revenue team, Colin and I chatted about how to nail the first 30 seconds of a cold call. I mean, it's like a very, very special skill set, but it can be used in so many different ways. And I think cold calling in conjunction with cold emailing, in conjunction with cold LinkedIn, the last session before us on LinkedIn, there were some phenomenal takeaways from that one. Heard some really great ideas that resonate here. It's about target, it's about message, and it's about timing there. So nothing new under the sun, really. But for channel, look, we tend to optimize for channels we like, whether as leaders or as companies or as individual contributors. we tend to optimize for the things we like doing. And that's totally the wrong way of doing it. My preference is, of course, to optimize for the person receiving the message. So, I met with Trish Bertuzzi some time back, and we talked about the fact that, a lot of marketers are more into the digital medium. So if you can optimize for email, you're going to find a greater win rate, and you can reach them more easily than over mobile devices, or rather over the phone. We had a chance to try and call on IT back in the day at my previous agency, and IT is really freaking tough to get on the phone. So optimizing for certain channels is persona based largely. It could be company based. Like if you're trying to reach construction companies, they're on job sites. If you don't have their mobile phone, good freaking luck reaching them over the phone. You're going to reach a gatekeeper all day long. So I wouldn't say like, hey, because I love the phone, we should talk about optimizing for the phone. I would say optimize for the recipient, for the buyer, the person you're trying to reach. It has nothing to do with what you like, what you prefer, what you're good at. If you're not good at something that they prefer to receive, go get good at it or hire somebody who's good at it, because you need to be optimizing for them, not for yourself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And as much as you can, with automation becoming more and more of a standard thing, you have the tools to figure out where you're connecting. If it's like calls at a specific point in a sequence, if it's emails at a specific point, if you're calling based off of engagement, like just use the data that you have to evolve your sequence appropriately. And Rex is right. Like IT has always been a very challenging contact to get through to. And especially now with everybody's transitioning to working from home, like I think that like pretty much everybody's a lot more difficult to get through on the phone. Just because everybody's getting set up at office using Zoom. Office phones are probably not going to be a thing for much longer as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, if you could cold Zoom call somebody, I'm sure we'd do pretty well these days with that. But I totally.
Are you listening, Zoom? There's an idea for a new product for you.
Cold Zoom calling. Make people hate picking up their Zoom. I think that the channels here are many. It can be tempting to assume you know something too. So, I mean, Tyler, you probably test just as much as I do. We're not going to assume we know something about a certain persona or a company type before we figure it out. I mean, we owe it to ourselves to go try it. So try a lot of calls, try a lot of emails, try a lot of LinkedIn, and see what the data is telling you, because your assumptions are probably wrong. By and large, we're just not very good at guessing human behavior if we've never been in that role before. So go figure it out, try and reach people over those different channels. And then I was going to mention piggybacking on multiple channels. So we heard in the previous session talking about on LinkedIn, you can do voicemail drops, as it were, like leave a voice message or send a video over LinkedIn. One of the coolest things I ever saw, Ryan Reiser, my former co-founder, he used to connect with people on LinkedIn and then immediately send them a video. Or in the connection request, it was just a link to a video where he was actually introducing himself to this person specifically. Like he would do one-off videos. I've seen video leveraged really well when you know that a channel works, but you're not getting a response. So what I mean by that is you send an email and it doesn't bounce and they open multiple times. Hey, they use email. They're in that channel, but we just didn't say anything compelling enough to get them to take action. Why don't I shoot them a video? Versus trying to use video at the very beginning on every single one of your cold emails. I mean, that's just incredibly tedious. You'll never reach the number or the volume that you need to. So kind of combining these channels, it doesn't have to be one and done and try it and test it and figure it out and then never try anything else again. You can combine some of these. And then my final advice would be in multi-touch sequences. So Tyler, you can probably speak a lot to this. Leave a voicemail that references an email, right? Like, hey, I'm going to send you an email. Look out for it from Tyler at Predictable Revenue, right? Like you can use these things to point to each other in whatever channel they prefer. You're still getting the bang for your buck in that attempt by referencing those other channels.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even just like giving a call based off of your conversation. Like you say you've been like engaged with somebody like LinkedIn for a while, and you just like decided to throw in a call into your like email sequence or your whatever sequence, and you're like, hey, we've been chatting on LinkedIn for a little bit here. Thought I'd give you a call. You sounded pretty interested. One thing I'd also like to keep in mind here, and it's because there's so many variables in the different types of way you can reach out now and how they're all going to interact with each other. Say you have like a blended email phone outreach and you aren't connecting by phone and you decide that, all right, let's not do this anymore. Take a look at your email open rates, because even though you're getting response through your email, if you remove something in that environment, it changes everything. And you might actually find that even though you're not talking to anybody on the phone, getting those voicemails or getting those messages is going to push them to the inbox and get you better results from this channel. So while you may want to, depending on the investment, like, step back a little bit, you don't necessarily want to just ignore that could be a real changing factor in the rest of your sequence.
Yeah, I mean, I give the example of a construction company and you're only going to reach an administrative assistant or a gatekeeper, right? Sometimes those people have incredible power and they can say, hey, look for an email from Sarah. She just sent it over to you. Like they're not going to pass through, the call, but they will reference like, oh yeah, this person keeps calling. They said they sent you something. Like you're more likely to get that response over email than you would have from that phone call, even if you never hit them on that channel, if you didn't reach them on that channel. But because you included that step, because you learned from the admin, or you, won a little bit of favor with them by being friendly and surprising them with a joke at the end of a cold call. I've seen people do that. Like you can win. You don't want to drop out every channel just because you saw that one was working best. I think it still makes sense. So Tyler, great point on that.
And a quick tidbit personally about dealing with gatekeepers. So I'd rather get a gatekeeper than like a voicemail or a nothing, because like this is an opportunity for you to engage with the company. If you can ask them relevant questions, if it's like, they're often like pretty engaged with the company there. And if you can get anything from them and just sort of like they'll pass along that warmth into the company, you'll earn yourself a lot of favors. So and this is like for people like, this is for like the SDRs out there. Like don't treat gatekeepers like an obstacle. They can be your best friend.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, so if I were selling to Sarah and I reached Tyler, like Tyler, I might ask you, like, can I get through to Sarah? And if you didn't transfer me along, I could still learn like, oh, she's out of the office or she's traveling or she's in a meeting. And if we had a brief but good interaction, I'd actually email Sarah and say, hey, I just spoke with Tyler. He was a peach, like super helpful. You didn't patch me through because you were in a call, but value proposition, right? Like, but I was calling about this. And there's something personal about remembering their name. I literally had, for a long time in several of my companies, I've had a field in CRM called admin or gatekeeper name that we would reference all the time. Like, oh my gosh, I spoke to Susan. She was great. Or Jim, he was awesome. And like just knowing their names means that you gave a crap one step above the average sales rep. And that puts you to that next level of messaging. And in any channel, you're going to have an advantage.
Cool. Amazing. That's a great tip. There are a couple of topics that we haven't dived into as deeply as the others. So I want to put it to the chat for the last few minutes here. The three that I think are remaining that we could really dive into would be the being more human and connecting at a personal level, how outreach evolves throughout sequences and how to adapt to changes, or building sequences with relevant messaging that cuts through the noise. So taking all that into consideration, what one of those do you guys want to hear about most? Because we probably only have time to tackle that one more.
I'll tell you 1 and 3 are combined.
Disembodied voice coming in here from Colin. We've got Josh is going to be jumping in 5 minutes. It doesn't mean we have to stop. It just wanted to, he's going to be coming in shortly. I just wanted to bring him into the conversation. We can have a nice transition that way.
Cool. I'll just mention while we're kind of waiting to hear from the audience here, the ability to be human, recognize the reality of the environment we're all in, and not just call up business scenarios, but like personal human scenarios, is also going to help you to stand out, right? And be more relevant and make people care about you as an individual. It's very hard as a disembodied voice that Colin was, a disembodied voice on the phone or over email. There is no personal connection there. So the more that you can recognize, hey, those are people on the other side receiving as well as us, trying to reach out to them. Huge advantage there. And there's a lot of things you can do. Quick tip, don't mention COVID. Like, please, you can mention challenges, but like, Tyler, I'm sure you have some passion around this. You're also going to get blocked by Gmail and other recipients. That's a huge trigger right now.
I've got some opinions about COVID-related messaging. I honestly, the first car commercial I saw about, uncertain times, just set me off the rails. So I'm like, all right, it's time to change everything. And this was probably back in May.
I was going to say it had to be May, man. Yeah, there's been way too much of it.
So at this point, it's really just been about like, everybody understands what's going on right now. And I think that like moving to something that doesn't reference it and give people maybe even like a sense of normalcy for a little while, I found like good success with, because people go to work, if they're really engaged with what they're doing and you're talking about like problems that they're having and you're connecting with it, that could be a really good way to just like have that human element. And, in the previous segment there are definitely channels that are more appropriate that you can do that over and scale out for. So like, LinkedIn's really good. There's a lot of social selling relevance on LinkedIn. Phone calls, obviously, like whenever you get somebody on the phone, like you have a moment to be human. Email is a little bit more challenging, just because I like to use email for scalability, but you put it maybe a little bit deeper into the messaging there. If we get into like how to construct outreach, then maybe we'll dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, Sarah, did we hear the word from the audience here?
Doesn't look like it, not quite yet. So how about you guys pick? Dealer's choice.
Cool, Tyler.
You guys dive into the one.
All right, so one more choice. What was
actually somebody just popped in, so never mind. Outreach evolving is the one that came in first from Joe.
So how does outreach evolve? Sorry, remind me the framework for it.
Yeah, it was how does outreach evolve throughout the sequence? So how do you adapt to changes? I'm not sure exactly what the context is there, if it's kind of like around the messaging. So how do you change up the messaging as you kind of build that story throughout the sequence? Or how does your like tone and stuff that Tyler has good knowledge on? Yeah, take it from there.
Yeah, Tyler, I know you've got a bunch of stuff on how you adapt sequences over time or how you address which steps to put where. So I'll let you start with that.
Yeah, so I mean, what I really like to do is segment out. And I'm a big rule of threes guy. Is that I want to start off obviously with like introduction messages, maybe like one or two where you just start off your outreach, just letting them know you exist and doing that like, we solve X by Y producing Z. Just like very briefly, I mean, asking for like a very straightforward like call to action, like, are you the best person to talk about this, or do you want to have a conversation or whatever? Then we kind of dive into actually I have notes here, and then we get into like some of our context messaging where we give like very concise messaging, building relevance for the outreach with the CTA to get on the call, like more specifically here.
Yeah, I think there's always the temptation to go for the throat, as I say, which sounds like a very violent description, but like that's how it is. Like sales reps are often enticed by the allure of I sent 10 emails and I got 2 meetings, so I should just always go for the meeting, as if that was the only way that humans interacted, was like yes or no to a meeting. But like there's a ton of calls to action, right? Like Tyler, you were mentioning different ways to introduce yourself, to get them to respond to something if they're the right person. I mean, that's kind of like the classic predictable revenue from the book way back in the day. It was like, hey, are you the person who handles this, right? Like that's totally fair. That's a perfectly reasonable question. I think there's a little bit more of an assumption now that because data is so available that you should know that. You should be doing the work yourself to figure that out. But yeah, a little predictable revenue classic there. That's great.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah.
One thing I'll also say, and it really depends on the market that you're reaching out to, especially within the IT market where their job titles are going to be, and this is for scalability. Like if you're like trying to do like a very broad outreach, there isn't necessarily going to be as much information about, how people's responsibilities are going to be broken down in the, like, say the IT space where we're getting and finding new people all the time. So we'll shoot over the head, like say we're looking at trying to figure out like vendor management or something like that, where it's going to be somebody's job, but like very few companies are going to be big enough that they have a dedicated title for this. So we just want to shoot slightly above here and be like, all right, like how are people being classified?
You're going top down.
Yeah. And we kind of like use this to like discover new titles as they're coming up and kind of expand based off of that, because there's new tech every day and people are being changing responsibilities on how you distribute that.
So yeah, I guess this is a great segue point. Thank you so much, Rex and Tyler, for coming on and talking to us about sequences. Thank you so much to all of you who asked those questions in the chat. It's really wonderful for us to have that engagement from you. And a reminder that these two will be in that Slack community to answer any of those questions that went unanswered, because I know you guys had some more of those value props. You had some more targeting and some of those things that these two experts can take a look at. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you, Josh.
And if you don't see Rex and Tyler in Slack on TikTok, if you guys just keep scrolling, dun, dun, dun,
I'll be on later. So big jobs to be done theory. guy myself. So looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Rex.